Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the DDT Method podcast. I can finally say that this is an episode that, without a shadow of a doubt, everybody has been literally counting down the minutes to, and it is an absolute honor to be here with these gentlemen. Today, I bring you the great mitochondrial debate, although it's probably going to be more of a discussion than a debate, with Anthony Castore and Alex Kikel. And there's been a lot of talk online recently about these mitochondrial supplements and the new generation of supplements, peptides, and small molecules hitting the market, just in general as it is anyways. What are the best ways to take these things? How do we maximize the results we're going to get? How do we mitigate any damage and minimize harm? And how can we get the best results without doing any damage? At the end of the day, how do we get super jacked, super shredded, super efficient in the workplace? How do we generate enough energy to be superhuman and have the best of everything without messing ourselves up? So we're going to dive into all the questions that you guys have been asking, including the BAM15 SLU together, separate, how do we run that protocol debate, discussion, thing, whatever it might be. But before we get into that, I just want to touch on what's been going on in the world. What have you guys been working on? What have you guys been seeing? And what's some of the stuff going on out there in this world of small molecules, peptides, optimization on every level? Alex, let's start with you.
I think what we're starting to see is kind of the thing I always talk about the most, where we can fix anything. We have tools to fix any problem now, which is awesome. But as we venture over from supplements to these small molecules, peptides, these are having a higher and higher chemical signaling strength potential, meaning they can now override biology. Even though they're endogenous compounds, they're so chemically strong, they can override basic biological responses, and you can get too much healing. That's where we get into the overspinning of mitochondria, which is just hyperpolarization, which just means you cause too much of an increase in potential to the millivoltage action of your mitochondria. We're seeing that with kind of every cell type. You can do that with the brain, for example. If you increase voltage too high to where, like for me, if I do that, if I take too many nootropics or these different, brain-based compounds, small molecules, my speech will just go 1,000 miles an hour and I'll start missing words because you're firing too fast. The same thing happens at a cellular level in every organ system. So we're able to fix every problem. It's awesome because there's so many tools out there now, but now it's really hammering down these protocols to make sure contextually wise, we know what we're doing and how to do it and avoid not taking too much. Because that's usually, it's in biology, right? Too much and too little, you've just made problems. We're trying to find the sweet spot for everyone.
So how are we determining whether or not we're going overboard? Because so much of this is so individualistic. You're going to have some people that are taking a small dose of something like an SLU and finding that they feel kind of whacked out of their mind. And we have other people running multiple milligrams. I just spoke to somebody that was doing some consulting with a company that wanted to produce a 10 milligram SLU capsule. And they very confidently said, well, the research says this is absolutely fine. Meanwhile, there's people taking 100 micrograms and noticing a pretty decent effect from it. How do we determine? Because it's kind of all over the place.
This is where the pharmaceutical mapping comes in, right? So we're having this big cohort of my clients, your clients, Anthony's clients, like everyone. We're all putting our information together, and that's why these podcasts are awesome. And we're trying to find the 80%, the majority. How do the majority of people respond? And then we can go from there. And then you can put out basic protocols, guidelines, and things like that. But it does come down so much to the individual. So the pharmaceutical mapping comes in where, to me, everyone knows roughly how everything works. Trial and error it for yourself, because how you respond to SS31 is different how I respond, different how Anthony responds, and it'll change year to year because your mitochondria aren't the same every year to year, day to day. So the biological differences will also change as time goes on, as you get healthier, as you get sicker, whatever the case may be. So I think that's really where, although the research is awesome, if we're not applying it, if we don't have that application, it kind of doesn't matter. Because I took a 40 milligram bolus of MOT-C a couple weeks ago on one of my longevity recovery weeks. Didn't get anything more than I did from 5 milligrams of that. And yet SLU, I can't take more than 500 micrograms. Or I get that hyperpolarization effect. And you get tired, wired, and you just can't focus and you're just blunted of energy, but you can't fall asleep, right? And SS31, 1 milligram for me is awesome. Anthony, I know you've taken, back when we worked together, you took tons of SS31 to fix some health problems, and it worked so well. So the range is massive. So we're trying to find these ranges overall, rely on our experiences, and then say, okay, if I'm getting advice on this podcast, what's 80% of people going to respond to? And the other 20%, just know you might not be in that 80% and know you have to do things differently.
Anthony, what are you seeing in terms of like the different approaches, and what are your thoughts on things like your own experience with SS31 and running that dose higher?
Yeah, so just to build on what Alex said, I think there's a lot of great content there. I think we need to have some objective measurements in place. And these are things that are going to tell us if our mitochondria is being stressed or if what we're doing is actually improving our biology. And some things we can look at in terms of labs, HSC reactive protein, interleukin 6, oxidized LDL, hemoglobin A1C, 8-OHDG, lots of them we can look at. Now, the practicality of running labs like that super often, not really for everybody. It could get pretty expensive and it takes time for these adaptations to show up. So some really simple things that I've been using with clients and the way that I kind of gauge things. In terms of a measurable metric, we're looking at blood glucose. If we think about how these are working and how they're improving mitochondrial function, it seems logical that we're going to see an improvement in insulin sensitivity. So if somebody's tracking their glucose and we see that they don't have a big shift after a meal and they return to that, I like 75 to 95 range in terms of glucose reading, I feel like we can pretty well say that, okay, these things are working. And we'd probably expect when they hit an ideal dose that that's going to kind of level off in there. Maybe they're at 80 and they improve to, they're at a 90 and they improve to an 80. And we don't really need to go lower than that. And it's kind of stabilizing there. So that tells me that dose that we're using for that person's probably effective. Some other things, a lot of people might have access to. VO2 max testing is huge these days. So when we look at like an RER, we want to see metabolic flexibility in there. So around that 0.85 is going to be a pretty good spot. Device I really like, super inexpensive, accessible, the Lumen. I kind of laughed when they came out. You blow into this thing and it's going to give you, if you're burning more fat or more glucose or carbohydrates. And what's nice about this is when you've got somebody that's primarily burning glucose and you start to get that mitochondria working, we're going to see that shift. We're going to see them more fat burning in states of rest. And we're going to see that metabolic flexibility in there. So just having some simple things we can kind of measure, I think is valuable. And that, with regards to when we're talking about some of this range and doses that we see for SLU and in particular, what's happening when you see, and I've seen doses as high as 20 milligrams, when we extrapolate directly from an animal study and apply that to humans, mathematically it might convert, but we're not taking into account all sorts of things like pharmacokinetics and just differences in lifespan. And it's a good starting point, but people that are doing that, I don't think that's the smartest thing to do. The thing we have to remember with SLU is it's basically writing the recipe for our mitochondria. And without knowing if we have kind of a good starting point in there, we could be writing a recipe for more bad mitochondria. So that's where, and we'll unpack it a little bit more, that's where the importance of having senolytic protocol with mitochondrial optimization, how do we layer that stuff? That's where that really starts to become a little bit more important, and we can kind of see the benefit from it. So just a couple more subjective markers that I look for. When I have people using these compounds, if they're telling me, I'm dropping a lot of fat, but I got a lot of brain fog, obviously we want them losing fat, but if we're having things like brain fog or worst case scenario, even sometimes seeing things like people are going to read fine on a pulse oximeter, but they feel like they can't take air in. And it's dysregulation in the chemoreceptors that's coming from perceived or from the drop in ATP production. And as that ATP drops, the sense of oxygen in those chemoreceptors drops, and that can lead to anxiety. Obviously, you think you can't breathe, even though the pulse oximeter is reading fine. So those are some of the things I kind of watch for. And really, at the end of the day, I mean, the simplest kind of Cliff Notes version that I like to give people in terms of, where do I start with my dose? Well, it's real easy to go up in dose. And if you're measuring these things and you're starting at bare minimum, 100 micrograms, you've never taken it before, that might be all you need. If you start with 100 micrograms and then you start to titrate up based on these metrics and whatever other metrics you come up with so that you're measuring it, then I think you can conclusively say, I'm a 200 microgram guy, or wow, I had to get all the way up to 20 milligrams before needles started to move. The one last caveat I'd add is we all know that there's no human studies on these. These are research compounds. And I'll be the last guy to tell you not to do research compounds, obviously. But with that being said, when we're talking about an injectable research compound coming from China that's never been tested in human without toxicity screening, I mean, come on, there's a good chance you're going to be dumping a lot of LPS, metals, things you just don't want in your body. And any benefit you might have for your mitochondria is going to be outweighed by those toxins you could be taking in. I just did a consult with somebody the other day that was using an injectable form, had a rash breakout. And, it's like, why would this be happening? I'm optimizing my mitochondria. And if you think about it, if there's like a little bit of mercury in there, think about the effects of mercury. I know firsthand, I've had mercury poisoning twice. Think about the effects of mercury on that mitochondria and how it's going to change the function of that mitochondria. And then lastly, the thing that I really want to emphasize when we're thinking about these compounds, any compound for that matter, when we're trying to produce more energy and we're trying to drive fat loss and we're trying to improve cognitive function, what we have to remember is that structure is going to dictate function. And what I mean by that is when I 100% agree with Alex, we got membrane potential is important, but we got to have that stable membrane. And we have to have those raw materials that are going to build that. Like, for instance, SS31 stabilizes cardiolipin, but it's not a raw material to build it. You have to have alpha-linoleic acid, and you have to have the correct phospholipids. So without those things in place, you can't build. There's nothing to stabilize. And without the membrane potential, there's nothing to move those electrons. So structure first, then function.
Amazing points. And these are things that people really need to spend more time learning about if they really want to maximize the use of these compounds. Now, from what you guys were both really saying, and then Anthony, you kind of drove the point home about why don't we start at a minimal dose and work our way up? That's always going to be the low-hanging fruit of how we do these things correctly. So, shout out to our boy Jay Campbell, start low, go slow, bro. If I throw the bro in there, I'm hitting all three Jay Campbell catchphrases in one reference. So love Jay. So I've been meaning to try and sneak that in a podcast at some point. Just recorded with him the other day. But nonetheless, it's very, very, very true that we want to start and work our way up because if no other reason than to not waste money. Let's not even look at the realm of doing damage. I mean, obviously you want to avoid doing damage at any cost, but if 500 micrograms of something works just as good as 750 micrograms of something, over time, you're just kind of pissing money away if you're taking 750 for no reason. And then we get into the whole realm of health and we're taking too much of a good thing and we're doing a bad thing. That's a whole other level that we want to avoid. Let's backtrack a little bit into the process and the life of the cell, because that'll give us an opportunity to discuss this cellular membrane and the actual structure and how to maintain it and how to build on the integrity thereof and break into what these different peptides will do. But let's go into the senolytic process, into apoptosis. What's the difference? What's going on here? What are these cells doing when they have to recycle or repair themselves? What's going on when the cells just have to be killed off? What do these compounds do to enhance or negate that process? Why is that good or bad? Alex, let's start with you.
Before we do that, can we actually cover the mitochondria portion first? Because that'll bleed into the senolytic conversation. that make sense?
Yeah, let's break it down.
Okay, cool. So Anthony, 1,000% right. The structure matters so much. So you're looking at those glycophospholipid replacements like the NT factors of the world. You're looking at all these different cofactors, vitamins, minerals that allow this mitochondria to grow and function properly. So if you look at how it's supposed to function, that outer mitochondrial membrane, highly permeable, we're supposed to get things in there. That inner mitochondrial membrane is going to be not as permeable because we kind of have to dictate what's going in and out. So that's more like voltage dependent anion channels and things like that. And that intramembrane space, that's where all the protons accumulate. So you go inside the mitochondria, you have those cristae. The cristae are important. Those are like those, they call it invaginations. It's those projections that come out. In pharmacokinetics and dynamics, surface area dictates ultimate action enzymatically. So the bigger your cristae are, the more functional mitochondria can be. And that's what we'll get to the end about the exogenous mitochondria. That's one of the ways you can start improving your mitochondrial functioning is by increasing the size of the cristae. And then inside of that, in the mitochondrial matrix, you have the different mitochondrial DNAs, the short open reading frames, the different places for things like glutathione to come in and bind. You have things like where the chlorella, spirulina, superoxide dismutase, all this cool stuff floating around the mitochondria. What we're looking at here, after the structure taken care of, right? We're looking at mitochondrial membrane potential. So if you look at a healthy mitochondria, and if you read the research, some say like negative 80 millivolts to 150, some say 150 to 200. I kind of lean on the 150 to 200 millivolts. I think that's what's kind of been proven over time, right? So if we have this rough range of what a healthy mitochondria millivolts is supposed to operate at, if you are too low on that, so let's say you're 100 millivolts or whatever arbitrary number, right? That means you're going to, I call it underspinning because I see things more from like the quantum biology side of things. That's the same thing as saying hypopolarization, which is the same thing as saying too low of mitochondrial membrane potential. If you're too low, drives apoptosis and the mitochondria basically explode, like they literally like explode and kill themselves off. Whereas if you go over 200 millivolts, roughly speaking, based on the person, it is overspinning, it's hyperpolarization, and it's too high of the mitochondrial membrane potential. So when we look at that aspect, we don't see apoptosis, we see bleeding of reactive oxygen species. This is where we get into the subatomic particle conversation, where you start just kicking off and having a bunch of proton and electron leak and slip. So go back to the mitochondria, keep that in mind. We have our complexes, we have our ATPase, which is spinning, which is dictating ultimate ATP production with ADP and inorganic phosphate actually fusing together, oxidative phosphorylation, right? As those electrons are skipping across the electron transport chain, protons have to be pushed out. That's normal biology, right? What we're trying to not do in this world is, I call it overspinning, like we said, hyperpolarization, where you start pushing too many electrons. They start slipping out. You have protons then going from the intermembrane space and being pushed out. Once you cut, that's called proton-electron leak and slip, which also goes hand in hand with excessive oxygen depletion, or rather oxygen dissipation, essentially. So you start wasting oxygen, pushing out protons, electrons into the body. That starts driving up more reactive oxygen species, and that's what causes the damage. So the cool thing about this, and why I bring up the mitochondrial membrane potential, is because you can use JC1 dyes and different fluorescence to measure the mitochondrial membrane potential of all these supplements, right? Of all our mitochondria. So if you get a red, like 590 nanometers, that's going to be more of the hyperpolarization. If you're more like, 529 nanometers, more green, that's more hypopolarization. So it can dictate and tell you how your mitochondria are acting from an actual millivoltage aspect. So going back to the millivoltages, all of these supplements and peptides are going to alter it. So SLU-PP-332, for example, is going to drive a high amount of millivoltage potential. So if you have that 150, and this is what Anthony said before, which I love, we don't know where our starting point's at because we don't have that good of measurements yet. But if I knew I was at 200 millivolts, I wouldn't take SLU because I'd probably overspin and cause hyperpolarization. But we don't know, so we start low and build up. Whereas something like a BAM15, it will pull down that millivoltage potential. But we're only pulling it down by like 2 to 5 millivolts, and that's been pretty well researched. Something like DNP, 2,4-dinitrophenol, in the same uncoupler class as BAM15, it'll pull down like 50 millivolts. It'll pull it down that much. FCCP, CCP, the other uncouplers out there, they will push it up to such a drastic extent, and they're not even close to BAM15. So BAM15 now in the Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, dementia, the neurological dysfunctional world, on top of the calcium change in the brain, we're using it to heal the brain, heal the spinal cord, do all these cool things while not causing too much underspinning, because you're only dropping a couple millivolts. The problem comes in, I think I'm kind of jumping the gun here, but the problem comes in when you add SLU is the BAM15 will potentiate the SLU, and now whatever millivoltage change you get from the SLU, it can be too much and you can overspin. So this is where the low dose slowly build up over time because you don't need that much because you're getting potentiation. But we're looking at things, I think, from more of a millivoltage aspect. Because once the structure is taken care of, and again, I'm glad you said that, Anthony, because everyone likes to gloss over NAC and vitamin C and all the different constituent and cofactors that are involved in making your mitochondria healthy. Once you make them healthy, then you layer in the peptides. But if you don't have those basics in play, then the structure is not there to drive the function. Something like baby aspirin will actually change the inner mitochondrial membrane potential, the voltage-dependent anion channels, and literally move nucleotides in and out more efficiently. The spirulina chlorellas will fuel superoxide dismutase function within the mitochondria. So we have all those basics in play. Also, what else we have to look at here? Because everyone's taking peptides. Most people are also having TRT, right? So insulin, for example, increases the mitochondrial membrane potential of the inner membrane, which is cool. It's going to potentiate that baby aspirin and just delivering of nucleotides, which is cool. Testosterone will actually improve proton gradients. So then you layer into polypharmacy in this conversation. It gets tough because you're a natural person who goes on TRT, you manage proton gradients, but then you add an SLU, and then you add in BAM, and now you're having to manage all these subatomic particles, which inherently are going to already be managed from the HRT. So you have all these things coming in. Where do you begin? And that's why you go back to start low and slowly build up from there. I'll stop talking because I've been talking for a while now, but I think looking at the structure, look at the function, and really at the millivoltage change, because that's what we're seeing in the exogenous mitochondria world. It's that millivoltage change that really dictates if you're going to have problems or not on both ends of the spectrum. Because in biology, extremes are bad. We like being right in the middle.
I definitely want to double down on just reinforcing the actual process that the cells go through, just based on the fact that there's so much being left on the table because people tend to want to jump to the magic pills first. And even our most dedicated listeners, followers, whatever you want to call people, are always kind of drawn in by the what can I add in and what can I do? I'll admit that even I do that still. I know better, but I'll pay attention to something if it's here's the latest and greatest thing to take. So what I think a lot of people can benefit from reminding themselves of is the gigantic turnaround that you can have in performance for the positive as well as health, and the gigantic amount of benefits you can get from paying attention to these smaller steps because they add up. Something like an SLU or a BAM15 or an SS31 utilized correctly can absolutely be a game changer. We've seen that. But if you deep dive into these different aspects of just little things that we can add in to enhance the process. You mentioned superoxide dismutase. Actually utilizing something that's going to drive superoxide dismutase like a spirulina product, and then potentially even adding something that acts like a superoxide dismutase, like a carbon-60, those two things hand in hand can have a profound effect on the actual operations of the cell. And in some people, that can give you an almost quote-unquote drug-like effect from adding in what's essentially a superfood and an antioxidant, for lack of better terms. If we utilize these things correctly, they're game changers, especially for the people that are watching this that are generally just a little bit more in tune with their bodies. Is the 25-year-old NPC competitor that wants to maximize all angles of performance going to benefit from this? Yes. Is he or she going to absolutely notice it? Maybe, maybe not. Is the intelligent biohacker that wants to maximize everything and is in this for the short term and the long term going to notice something? Most likely, because we're a little bit more in tune. That's not to say we're better than anybody, but we know what we want to feel. We know how we want to perform. And we can absolutely notice a big payoff from the little things. Anthony, what can you say to kind of build on just the overall process of the structure of the cell, what the cells do, what we need to pay attention to in that realm before we start diving into the great BAM15 SLU discussion?
So if I'm understanding correctly, when we're talking about cells, are we talking about the kind of the growth cycle of the mitochondria, or are we talking about more of the cell in general?
Let's go more into mitochondria in here. I'm trying to speak a little bit more generalistically just for a wide audience, but we can specify.
Sure. Okay. So when we think about mitochondria and biogenesis, which is creation of more mitochondria, essentially these mitochondria have, well, we'll kind of go through all of it so we can really put it together for people. When we're in states of low energy, that's going to trigger AMPK. And to give you some examples, people cold plunge. Well, if you think about it, you're jumping into a tub of cold water and you've got to create heat for your body. So you're expending calories and you don't have calories coming in. Energy deficit triggers AMPK. we take a nice long walk fasted. There's no energy coming in, and we're using up the energy that we have stored. So again, we perceive energy deficit, increase AMPK. What AMPK does is it increases lipolysis and glycolysis. So it's going to make energy substrates available. It's going to help with the breakdown of those fats and carbohydrates for energy so that our engine has something to run on. When we think about, and I'm going to build this into a car analogy so it all kind of comes together at the end. When we think about that AMPK, in order for those things to happen, that's a process where we're slowing protein synthesis and growth. So that's going to be your brake. Then when we think about mTOR, mTOR is when we're building, and that includes things like myelination of the nerve, imprintation of long-term memories, and of course, what we all love, putting on more muscle. So it's one of those things that we want to think about. Ironically, we have to break down to build. Imagine if you were trying to just do mTOR all the time, build, and you didn't have any raw materials to make your structure with. Not going to go real well. So getting back to how this ties into the mitochondrial cycle. So AMPK is going to signal PGC1 alpha, and PGC1 alpha kind of writes the recipes for mitochondrial biogenesis. And what's unique about SLU is it's going to communicate directly to PGC1 alpha without necessarily having to go through these other processes. So kind of a cool side note there. Now, in terms of mitochondrial growth cycle, we have fission, and fission is where we've got these mitochondria and they're going to split. And what happens when they split, this is an oversimplification, but basically good parts over here, bad parts over here. So ideally then what's going to happen is it's called mitophagy. It kind of sounds like autophagy, which is getting rid of bad cells. And this is mitophagy, getting rid of bad mitochondria. So we want to kind of clear those out. And then what happens, we've got all these good parts kind of floating around, but they're not complete because parts of the mitochondria that were maybe defective got taken away, and we need to have a complete mitochondria. So two good parts fuse together, fusion, and create these bigger, better mitochondrial structures. And over time, we get more of those fusing together, and we have these super complexes. And we've got these really efficient, well-structured mitochondria. Now, what can go wrong when we don't have those two things in balance? When we've got too much fission, so things are just splitting up really, really fast. Not only do we have the good parts of the mitochondria dividing, we have the bad parts of the mitochondria dividing. And as these things are trying to assemble, because we have to have a complete mitochondria to make energy, it changes the morphology of the mitochondria, so the actual structure. And you can end up with a bunch of bad mitochondria stuck together and the good ones still looking for a part. So it really kind of can create a lot of bad things. And this is why it's so important when we're talking about these life and death cycles of the mitochondria and how do we really optimize mitochondrial function. We have to have fission, we have to have fusion, and we have to have mitophagy. Now, what's really cool is I recently read a paper, actually a couple papers. I've been doing a deep dive on it lately, and this ties into some of the stuff we'll be talking about with fat loss. It's always been calories in, calories out, fat loss, and it's a tried and true formula. But have you ever wondered why that works? The answer is it's a simple equation, fusion, fission, that when we're dieting versus when we're excess calories, we're in different states, more fusion, more fission. And so if we think about, we've got fission as our calories are getting low. And why does this happen? Well, our body's thinking that we don't need to build bigger mitochondria. We need more mitochondria to create energy, like energy is going down. And after a while, remember excessive fission, a lot of parts around there, but we need those parts to assemble. So that's why people kind of plateau on that diet. And then they drop the calories again. So this process repeats, but we haven't begun to build good structure. So we kind of stumbled onto it as bodybuilders with the whole refeed concept. When you get that calorie spike, that drives fusion. So when you are able to have that little drop and then drive fusion, little drop, drive fusion, now you're building more efficient mitochondria that are better at fat burning. And that's why you see people be able to eat into a show, because they're managing mitophagy, which is getting rid of the bad parts. They're improving fusion and building super complexes. And they're creating that metabolic flexibility by respecting the structure and function of the mitochondria. So I hope that answers the question. I'm sure Alex can build a lot onto that as well.
Yeah, let's stay on this topic, because Alex, I literally think I saw your brain light up with like a sequence of lightning bolts when he tied into refeeds and whatnot. So let's continue there. So please take the floor.
Sorry, I get excited. That's why I put it the thing, because like, oh, I got to remember to talk about that. I think the refeed concept is amazing, because in your reading, you probably read about the phosphate starving stuff, right? So like whenever you have that depletion of calories and go hypocaloric, it's depleting phosphate stores. You massively refeed in 24 or 48 hours, whatever arbitrary time period that person needs, rapidly replete phosphate levels. Guess what that does? That jacks up mitochondrial memory potential, and that drives a greater fusion fission dynamic process. So you do get greater driver on the proper fusion in the proper fission. So you get more proper recycling of damaged mitochondria. The one thing I want to clarify real quick, Anthony, because I just want to make sure everyone out there didn't misunderstand you. With calories in, calories out, we all understand that it's not that simple, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Good. Okay. Just making sure, because it sounded like the opposite. I know you. So that's not you at all. So make sure everyone's on the same page there, right? Okay, cool.
So now that we understand, Alex, that these refeeds can be used to enhance the cellular process, like how would you structure them? Like, is there anything different you would do approaching a refeed other than the classical just calories up? And then like just to go right back into the point you were making.
So now again, with all this chemical signaling potential from supplements and peptides, you could basically get the effects of a fast without actually fasting, or you could actually fast before a refeed and also layer in these other supplements and peptides. So again, this is where you have to go with the biohacker longevity guy all the way down the line to an athlete and kind of dictate how they respond. Because not everyone can fast for 24 hours. A lot of females can't do 24-hour fasts. If they can, awesome. If not, pull it down. You can do shorter time frames. You can do dry fasting. What we're trying to do during this period of time is literally just drive that autophagy and mitophagy process and be potentiated with the little things like your carnitines, your spermidines, exogenous ketones, MCT oils. Go down the list of all these awesome autophagy and mitophagy players, potentiate your normal fast with that. So let's say you have a normal 5 days, normal calories, whatever that's going to be for you. Let's say in this, it's hypocaloric because you're dieting for a show, for example. Maybe you do a mini fast, potentiate it with these other compounds we're talking about, and then rapidly replete for the next 24 hours. So you get a greater phosphate flux, greater drive on lipolysis and beta oxidation, and you'll rapidly store intramuscular glycogen more efficiently. While also, again, recycling out damaged mitochondria and driving the actual potentiation effect of building new mitochondria. Because that's an important part to understand. Since we're in this world of, we have to understand basic biology, but understand once we're venturing into peptides, we're leaving basic biology behind. It completely changes once these peptides are introduced to our system. Because we can hyper-regulate the process and we could say, drive this process right now. When in reality, maybe in normal circadian patterns, it might only happen at noon, or it might happen 3 hours later, whatever arbitrary time frame. So we can pick and choose when we want certain chemical signals sent with our supplements and peptides. Then you pair that with your training, nutrition, all that fun stuff, and you get the best of both worlds. And that's how you can recomp. And that's tying this back to the conversation about the SLU-BAM debate. To me, that's why it's so cool and crazy, because we can drive all these processes at the same time and literally recomp. And this isn't just for the bodybuilder. It's for the longevity, the biohacker, it's for everyone. Because I think, Anthony, I know you've talked about futile cycles before with SLU and BAM. And to me, biology is one giant futile cycle, right? Because in reality, mTOR and AMPK are always happening. Not in the same place, but my trap might be undergoing an mTOR cycle, whereas my calf might be going through some AMPK, or organ systems and cells. It's always happening at the same time, and it always has to have that cycling process. A good futile cycle example that I really like bringing into the more like the physique world is lipid recycling. That's kind of like the most well-known futile cycle, at least the most people talk about, right? That is whenever you will liberate a fat from an adipocyte, dump it, mobilize it into the bloodstream, but you won't oxidize it. You'll just throw it off somewhere else and restore it. So whenever you would introduce something like an SLU and a BAM, you get greater lipolysis, greater mobilization, and greater beta oxidation. So you are essentially technically driving two opposing forces, but not really, because this is where it comes back to the overall dosage conversation, right? If you take too much and overspin, that's you have the sympathetic driver. That's you have where HRVs will shoot down. That's you have the actual accumulation of fluid inflammation because your mitochondria are overspinning and literally just throwing off a bunch of ROS. You're literally causing more inflammation to your body. Adipocytes become essentially inflamed, become insulin resistant, if we want to call it that, nutrient resistant, and then they don't lose fat. So yeah, you could technically come over that with like an Amlexinox. You could bring other players to lower mitochondrial membrane potential of the actual mitochondria, or you could just take a lower dose. So I kind of got off track there, but I'm getting excited. Sorry.
Well, let's take this opportunity before we move into the BAM and SLU debate conversation. I'm never going to decide what I want to call it.
Right.
Let's give these people paying attention some low-hanging fruit. Let's give somebody a protocol to follow or a suggested protocol based on something that you guys just both brought up, which is brilliant information that I don't want to become overlooked. Let's say we're running a 24-hour fast into a refeed. If we want to maximize fat loss during the fast and maximize the positive effects of the refeed when we do reintroduce those calories, how do we supplement during the fast and how do we supplement during the refeed? Let's talk natural subs, peptides, anything's on the table.
If I could just elaborate a little bit more on the nutrition part of it and fission and fusion, I've got a protocol that I learned from Dr. Seeds that I've been using with great success. And it really makes a lot of sense when we think about that whole low calories, high calories, what are the effects? So I'll have people do 50% of their calories for 3 days, 100% for 3 days, 75 for 3 days, 100% for 3 days, 50% for 3 days, 110% for 3 days. And I don't know the full science behind 3 days or if it would matter if you extended it to 5 days or whatever. The reason I don't like a complete fast, like not 24-hour fast, the research on those is done in disease states. And when we think about a bodybuilder, the oxidative stress we create, the detoxification that needs to occur, the stuff we're taking in from foods, there's a lot of things in there that are going to support those processes. So if instead we strategically manipulate our calories to optimize this fission fusion, I think that's going to support detoxification as well as really kind of get that balance where you want it so you can see that continued fat loss.
Do you change macros on those days for the calories, how you're going up and down? And
you can, if it's, my opinion is if I'm working with general population, that I keep it real simple. I say, for day one, for instance, you're going to be eating half the size of the palm of your hand for protein, kind of the John Berardi guide, using the hand. So half the size of palm of your hand for protein, half a fist for your starches, and as much vegetables as you want. Go bananas on those, especially if you're getting hungry. Fruits, half a fist, and fats, thumb. And then on your full days, full palm, 2 full palms if you're hungry. You kind of get where I'm going with this.
Yep. Yeah.
So that's generally the guideline I give people. With regards to macros, I've always had good success putting macros. You eat for what you're going to do. So if I'm going to be sitting here talking to you guys, brain's going to be using glucose, and I'm going to be primarily using my oxidative system. So it'd be fun to kind of blow into my lumen right now, but I bet I'm probably using, maybe 40% glucose, or 45% glucose, 55%.
I'll watch you blow on camera. If you want to, we'll get a lot of views.
There's our reel.
So to answer the question, is there a macronutrient? I think on training days, around workout time, especially after workout, I like to have more carbs with respect to those calorie guidelines. On non-training days, I generally do more fats. Thinking about, because the nervous system takes 72 hours to recover compared to our muscles that recover faster. So we want to have those phospholipids and plasmalogens we need to rebuild as fast as possible. So to layer on top of that even a little bit more, and this would be a whole nother conversation, I learned so much from N1, and it really got my wheels turning about training. And the system they use is really kind of specific to whether we want a more neural type of adaptation, more of a hypertrophy type of adaptation, or something where we're really trying to challenge the metabolic system. So depending on which phase of training I'm in also would have a bearing on macronutrients. I hope that's not too vague, but there's just a lot of nuance to the answer, and I don't want to monopolize the time talking about it.
No, that's a fantastic point to make. And I always try to kind of interject that in with every conversation, because training stimulus is such a big thing. And I might be a little biased because I'm a certified coach through N1 and have been through all of their educational platforms. And that's really what I base my training foundation in. And those different types of stimulus, in my opinion, metabolic, neuro, or just hypertrophy based, can and should be paired with specific macro intake and specific peptide and supplement utilization, because these make physiological changes. You're taxing your metabolic system insanely when your rest is low, you're using supersets, you're going for more substrate utilization and storage as opposed to hypertrophy stimulus, and so on and so forth. And you're right, that's a whole other conversation. If I go down that rabbit hole, we'll be here until 2 p.m. So not that I think anybody would mind, but again, we'll try and condense the information here. Before we get into the whole mitochondrial or the whole BAM15 and SLU, I just want to finish on this point about utilizing different things in this fast and fed state, because I think we really can light up a lot of light bulbs over some people's heads here, and they can start utilizing this immediately. So Anthony, you have this almost staggered approach to calories up, calories down, and mitigating the potential damage or mitigating the less than ideal situation by manipulating the macros to the stimulus of the day. Alex, you talked about more of the fast going into the refeed meal. Going back to the original question, how would you leverage supplements and peptides during the fast to maximize that fat loss? And then would you utilize anything else to maximize the utilization and the benefits of the refeed?
Sure. Yes. So you want to you go ahead and start, Alex. I've talked for too long already.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so fast, maximize beta oxidation, lipolysis, all that good stuff. And then going into the actual refeed, maximize hyperstorage of glycogen, more nitrogen retention, anabolism, mitochondrial memory potential, all that fun stuff, right? Okay, cool. So start of your fast. And again, the duration of fasting depends on the person. Some people, it's only an 8-hour fast. It's literally just overnight. It's nothing crazy. Other people, 12 hours, 16, 24, 36. Once we go above that, some people run into problems depending on what you're doing with training, but essentially have your fast set, how you respond best, then wake up. And ideally, I'd like to start off with some basic rebounding work just to start stimulating stem cells at the bone marrow level, but we'll gloss over that because we're talking about supplements and peptides. We'd ideally want to start with some kind of exogenous ketone product. I'm a big fan of both ketone 8 and ketone IQ, depending on the person, how they metabolize it. Yeah, there you go. I'll take them both at the same time, depending on the day, the need, how you process aldehyde in the liver, all those things. We start off with our exogenous ketones to start dumping ketones in the system. So we either go into the plasma, straight to the brain, or liver, beta-hydroxybutyrate to the brain. Doesn't matter. We're getting that pull down on neuroinflammation. We're starting to drive the entire system at getting better at liberating fat from the cells. So we're trying to look at lipase activation. That would also mean it's ideal time to layer in some kind of a growth hormone product. Could be an ipamorelin, could be the CJCs, an exogenous growth hormone. Again, goes back to the specifics of the person, but something on that spectrum to drive more lipase interaction, to go into the adipocytes, to snip off those fatty acid tails and to dump it into the system. So at the same time, though, while we're trying to drive beta oxidation and lipolysis, we're also trying to drive more autophagy. So starting off your day with a pretty big bolus of fatty 15, upwards of 4 to 6 capsules, depending on finances and your levels on lab work. Going into a spermidine, again, depending on the dosage, maybe anywhere from 3, 6, 10 milligrams, depending on what product you have, finances, what you're doing throughout the rest of the week, driving a little bit of maybe a little bit higher upregulation in urolithin A to recycle some damaged mitochondria. We're starting off to start, right? You're starting to see the pieces. We're driving more lipolysis. We're recycling damaged cells. We're recycling damaged mitochondria. And with senescent cells as an overall concept, again, they're not bad. It's the overaccumulation of senescent cells in the wrong areas. So you have a damaged knee, you go and get stem cells and don't clear out senescent cells beforehand. They're copying damaged genetic information. That's a bad scenario with too much senescent cell accumulation. Normal people aren't having that much senescent cell accumulation in this kind of biohacking athletic world because we're inadvertently doing things to manage it. So we have this, we start off our day, maybe with our coffee, we have a little bit of MCT powder to get further driver on our ketogenic cascades. Then as the day kind of goes on, you start to notice an energetic flux, right? So as you're getting more ketone, fat-based adapted, we're trying to, at least in my world, be mitochondrially, neurologically, and metabolically flexible. Because if you look at the metabolic flexibility, that's more what I see as the macronutrients. The mitochondrial flexibility is more the cofactors, the vitamins, the minerals, all those little things that most people don't care about. Well, we do, but a lot of people don't, right? And then the neurological flexibility, because our brain can literally run on oxygen, acetylcholine, glucose, and ketone bodies. So we got 4 ways to pump our brain during this fasting session. And for a lot of people, maybe they don't have that clarity of just having the ketones in play. So maybe you would layer in other players like the alpha GPCs, acetyl-L-carnitines, choline chlorides, just to get their neurological exchange. You also get more fat mobilization out of the choline injections, like a chloride variety. Then again, following what we just said, getting more drivers oxygenation to the brain, you could do some light hypoxic work, or you could do like superoxygenated water or some kind of an oxygen-based therapy or CO2-based therapy. Carbon dioxide therapy will obviously, with the Bohr effect, will improve how we mobilize and how we utilize oxygen throughout the system, but it'll also drive up further liberation. So we get all this fat liberated into the system. We're driving autophagy, mitophagy, all this cool stuff, and then we further potentiate that fat loss. So by this point, you're at the end of your fast, right? You can add in more things, but we'll kind of leave it there. At this point now, depending on who you are, if you could take some kind of either an exogenous insulin product or a berberine or a metformin, depending on how you respond, you have to hit that insulinogenic cascade because you want a rapid flux in mitochondrial membrane potential. Because throughout this day, as you're clearing, so this happens on oncology all the time with all my cancer individuals, if you over-lyse a cancer cell, recycling that and getting out basically causes a heart space response. Happens with mycotoxins, happens with driving these senolytic processes so hard, right? So as you're clearing these damaged cell bodies, mitochondria, whatever we want to call them, out of your system, you accumulate a little bit of systemic fatigue. So we want to bring up, because that lowers down mitochondrial membrane potential, anything that drives up the sirtuins, BGC1A, protein kinase C, phosphonol 3 kinase, AMPK, those will all rapidly drive up mitochondrial membrane potential. So it could be an insulinogenic-based player. It could be maybe a bump of, if you're in the natural world, like a Tongat Ali or a Testalutin or something to drive acute androgenic cascades to rapidly flux and then further drive that transition so you can start actually storing these as nutrients. So as you start having, ideally, again, depending on the person, maybe a higher carbohydrate, moderate nitrogen, moderate fat refeed, depending on who you are, you're preferentially going to be using those fats incoming to drive parasympathetic beta oxidation for the day because you just stop fasting. The glucose is going to be spared and stored as intramuscular glycogen. And the nitrogen from the amino acids is going to be stored intramuscularly because that's where amino acids live, right? That's where the carnitines can come into play as well to drive that fluxing of different substrate to put more glucose as intramuscular glycogen. And then you could do a bunch of different things, but that's generally how you get set it up in kind of an easy packaged format. If we would layer in the SLU and the BAM, that'd be done ideally at the beginning of the fast because we're trying to drive the process of lipolysis, mobilization, beta oxidation for the day. Maybe yohim beam, but then you have a stimulant there. So depending on how you respond to that. Bunch of different ways you could do it, but something along those lines.
Amazing information. And again, it's all a testament to understanding how different things work and how to utilize intelligent synergy and polypharmacy. And again, that all comes down to not just taking something because everybody else is, but understanding what these things do, because then we open up all these different doors of how to leverage them together. So without further ado, let's move this into BAM15 and SLU. We've broken down the entire process. We've touched on how each of these work. They're opposite ends of the spectrum, so to speak. What are the benefits of the individual products, just to recap? And then what are the benefits and potential downfalls of using them together? Alex, let's start with you on this one. I know you just finished making the point on the fast and the refeed, but you were very vocal in putting out information early on about the combination of the two, and you have a lot of practical experience with it. So let's go into both products and why you feel that they could be beneficial together and what some potential downfalls are. And then Anthony, if you could build off of that into why we would want to or not want to utilize them together, and maybe how we would use them in combination with each other, but maybe not at the same time. But Alex, let's start with you on how these things work together separately and what to do with them.
Okay, so we'll try and be specific because I don't want to spend all the time talking. I'll make sure Anthony gets to talk. We have this nice back and forth and everything. BAM15, we can use it to essentially drive fat loss and beta oxidation to a pretty high extent, right? We can also drive it, and we can use lower doses to change the AMPK to mTOR cascade in the brain via calcium channels to act as a phonotropic. You can use it in the oncology world to change the mitochondrial potential of how tumors actually develop, how they function. So you can make tumor mitochondria basically inefficient. You can use it to be a nutrient partitioner if you want to microdose it infrequently. It is an amazing, of all the uncouplers out there, and this is even like taking thyroid hormone into consideration, like everything. I feel like BAM15 is just the best out there. Like the 2,4-dinitrophenols in the body, but when we're big back in the day, we have smarter compounds now if you're just trying to drive beta oxidation and fat loss. But it has tons of application, especially in the neurological dysfunctional community. So I've done a lot of work over in that with, again, Alzheimer's, dementia, Parkinson's, and what it can do to actually rehypertrophy the brain in those cortical regions that tend to accumulate more plaque, more inflammation, and just cause more dysfunction. A lot of it's an atrophy-based problem, so we just hypertrophy it. So BAM15, ton of uses for this conversation. I think we're mainly talking about it for beta oxidation, fat loss, right? All uncouplers, by the way, for everyone out there, this is not a Moore's better equation. We want enough to top off the process. We don't want too much because all of these things that affect mitochondria essentially can cause the overspinning of the ATPase and throw off a bunch of protons and electrons. So from the BAM15 side of things, what we're trying to do is cause that heat dissipation and ATP loss via proton exchange. So it's more of a protonophore uncoupler, if you want to kind of be specific. So our example beforehand was ATP complexes in the mitochondria, ATPase spinning, making mitochondria. The protons get pumped out into the intermembrane space. So between the outer and the inner membrane, right in here, that's where the protons accumulate. BAM15 will push that process harder, push off more heat dissipation. So you see protonophore translocation, electron flow, increase in oxygen consumption, decrease in mitochondrial membrane potential by about 2 to 5 millivolts, nothing too crazy, and then ultimate loss of ATP. So if you take too much or potentiate it too much, those protons then slip out. They don't really catch electrons, but I think it sounds cooler that way. They'll kind of grab electrons as well, put it out into the space, start to drive more reactive oxygen species damage and accumulation. So too much causes a bad thing because you're overspinning and you can't control subatomic particles. So then we go to the SLU-PP-332 conversation. So Anthony mentioned before, which I love, the interaction with peroxisome proliferated active receptor gamma coactivator 1 alpha, which drives so many different positive changes to the mitochondrial architecture, to nutrient partitioning, has spillover into the myological world, so we can start storing more intramuscular glycogen. We'll have some offshoot to the AMPK world, which also drives up the mitochondrial membrane potential. I kind of like to describe SLU as almost doing it all for mitochondria because we see it fortifying inner and outer membrane spaces. So it's kind of repairing in a way, not doing much for the electron skipping. But again, you can make the argument if you're taking care of the membranes, that kind of kind of takes care of itself, which maybe it doesn't, but I kind of like to see it that way. There's no research on it changing the cristae, at least to my knowledge. Anthony, if you know about that, I want to hear that later on. But the cristae, I believe, stays the same. Mitochondrial DNA then will increase because normally we're causing 15% protein exchange with normal mitochondrial DNA. We can bypass that and upregulate it to, again, there's no hard facts, but I'd say at least 50% of increasing the protein accretion within mitochondria from the mitochondrial DNA compared to 50% at baseline. So SLU to me drives a lot of things. I've seen it actually decrease fibrosis in the penis. So for a lot of erectile tissue-based problems, damage erections, things like that, PFS, it's a pretty big player. We can use it to repair ocular tissue. I tried it with eye drops a while ago. That was a complete disaster. You don't try these things at home and everything type thing. But we've started to see that actually repair a lot of ocular, more glycation and inflammatory events. And again, tons of different aspects you could use it for. The glycolytic fiber type transformation, we'll kind of leave it in terms of, I see it as like the recomping agent. So that's the thing that'll drive a little anabolism. It'll repair a little bit of mitochondria. It'll drive a good amount of beta oxidation, right? But again, too much is a bad thing, because if you are hyper driving this mitochondria, that millivoltage potential, that spin, it will overspin, hyperpolarize, and then that millivoltage potential goes through the roof. So the combination comes in because you have one player driving lipolysis, beta oxidation, all this goodness, and you have another player potentiating every aspect of that while making up for the bridge and gap, the difference between the mitochondrial membrane potential difference. So before, where I said with BAM15, protonophore translocation, electron flow, oxygen consumption, decrease in mitochondrial membrane potential, 2 to 5 millivolts, you bridge that gap with SLU, because anything that increases electron transport chain activity actually improves mitochondrial membrane potential. So SLU bridges the gap that BAM15 causes. But as awesome as this combination is, again, the problem is BAM15 potentiates SLU and SLU potentiates BAM. So now you have an equation where you're not really dropping it from a hypopolarization aspect. You're more worried about hyperpolarization, causing too much of a millivoltage potential spin. A lot of people, that's why, like when I would dose it, ideally for most people, it's about 100 micrograms to about 50 milligrams. So 50 milligrams of BAM15 and about 100 micrograms of SLU. That's a great starting point, because it's usually, for probably 90-95% of people, it's not enough to cause so much hyperpolarization till they run into problems. But for some people, that's more than enough. So it's not a high dose combination product because they potentiate each other. But if you low dose it in the right fashions, you could see some amazing things in terms of beta oxidation, recomping, a little bit of anabolism, some of the nootropic-based effects. It's an amazing all-in-one combination product, right? Now, what Anthony will probably talk about, which I also love doing, is not just take them together, but there can be a place and purpose for someone who maybe doesn't respond well to SLU or BAM, where you would stagger them in alternating days. Like Anthony, we did that back whenever we worked together a while ago. Like, there's so many awesome combinations. So if you're not a responder, if you get way too hyperpolarized from the combination, because that happens, you just pull back the dose. Or if you can't pull back the dose, then go ahead and separate the two. So that's kind of my little synopsis of the combination, separate, that kind of stuff.
Anthony, the floor is yours.
So I like to explain things really simple, and I'll start with a story. I got my cold plunge tub working finally, and I'm all excited to use it. And I got the filter going, filling the tub up with water, and, it takes a little time to cool down. So I'm thinking next morning I'm going to have my cold plunge. And I go out there about 3 hours later, kind of check on it, and I realize, there's the water level's barely in there. And I'm like, what the heck is going on? Well, dumbass over here forgot to close the drain. And you can imagine, if you don't close the drain, if you have two things going on that are competing against each other, you got water that's going out and you got water that's going in, neither of them are going to work. And the reason I use that analogy to start with is when we think about BAM and we think about SLU, there's a fundamental conflict in their mechanisms. BAM is an uncoupler and SLU is an ERRA, and they work through these really distinct and inherently opposing metabolic commands. BAM is going to dissipate, as Alex said, the mitochondrial proton gradient, and this reduces how efficiently we can produce ATP. SLU is going to increase ATP production, but also utilization. And that's that feudal cycle he was referring to. And when we think about kind of what are the effects of if we do two things that are opposing each other at the same time? Well, when the mitochondria has to work that hard, there's going to be excessive reactive oxygen species production. And the reason that happens, it's like a computer. If a computer's trying to do a lot of functions, battery's going to go down faster. If we're trying to work really hard, we produce heat. That's just what we do. When things are working really hard, heat's produced. And when we've got excessive demand for energy and creation of these reactive oxygen species, it's going to deplete our systems like our glutathione, NADPH, superoxide dismutase, and catalase. And it's going to impair the redox signaling. And the reason that's important is when we think about molecules like NRF2 or HIF1A, when we impair their responses to stress, recovery, adaptation, and redox is off, that's when literally everything in our body kind of hinges on this simple process of redox. When we think about what's happening structurally, then, because of the oxidative stress that's being generated, this is going to cause mitochondria to fragment, kind of that fission thing. And it's going to be harder to isolate those damaged organelles. So there's a greater chance of things fusing together we might not want fused together. And when we think about that, Christe, it's going to undergo maladaptive restructuring, because now it's just trying to keep up and it's trying to do a lot. This is going to impair mitophagy. Instead of being able to go in there and precisely remove the bad parts, we're not going to be able to do that. And some things that we're not even addressing yet. One, for these things to work, there has to be a stable structure. So that means that for somebody to even take the lowest dose, if you don't have good membranes, so if you haven't been doing your bright lipids, your alpha linoleic acid, those kinds of things that are going to build these structures, the analogy I always use, it's like you're trying to shoot a cannon off of a canoe. You're not going to hit the target and you're probably going to sink the canoe. And that's what happens when we overload the mitochondria, or what Alex would call spin the mitochondria. The other thing we have to consider is, as we're increasing this demand for energy, because of the SLU and because we're losing so much energy with the BAM, we have to have solid beta oxidation in place to begin with. There has to be availability of fats and glucose. So if you have somebody that's dieting, or somebody that doesn't have a healthy, well-functioning, metabolically flexible mitochondria, there's no fuel coming in. Again, more oxidative damage. The way that I think it makes sense is when we think about a day where we're working out and we want to increase that signal that we're producing and using more energy. We want to potentiate that. So those are the days that we use the SLU, and we increase that mitochondrial biogenesis, everything that we want to do. Then on a day where we're recovering, where we're not doing anything, probably not more than twice a week, even if you have more off days, that would be where I'd take BAM. Then you don't have, because BAM has a short 1 hour half-life. SLU, they haven't really mapped out, but it looks like it's between 8 to 12 hours half-life. So if you do these things separately, you don't have competing mechanisms. You're allowing them both to function optimally in the environment that they're in. The other thing I'd say with that too, is more important than, taking the BAM and SLU, let's just think about, how do we set up the mitochondria to even be able to use these things? So the first thing we want to think about, and this kind of goes back to our discussion on fat loss, let's do something that's going to drive AMPK, increase the availability of substrates for energy, and in particular, something that's going to drive beta oxidation. So a really simple solution you can do in the morning, low dose leucine, like 1.5 grams or less, is going to trigger AMPK. And then go take a nice long walk out in the sunshine. There is a huge circadian component to cell recycling, mitochondrial recycling, all that stuff. And that would be a whole nother conversation. But that simple act of getting out there in the morning, walking in a fasted state, getting sunlight, and having that low dose leucine, now you're creating that beta oxidation you need to do to have that energy substrate available. Now we got to think about, we've got this availability of energy, but the bottleneck might be getting that energy to the cell. So doing something like an injectable carnitine makes a lot of sense, because carnitine is going to transport that to the cell. So now we're doing pretty good. Now, I'm sorry, when I say cell, I mean mitochondria. now we're doing pretty good. And we got to think about, well, we need some gasoline for that mitochondria to run on. And I think it makes a lot of sense to use 5-amino 1-MQ. It works by decreasing NNMT, which is what breaks down NAD. And it's got the curious side effect, and everybody's going to love this one, of shrinking. When you decrease NNMT, it shrinks fat cells. So we're already headed in the right direction. But more importantly, by decreasing NNMT and making NAD more available, you have something that can donate energy to that mitochondria. Now, the other things we need to think about putting in there are going to be ketone ester, specifically the ketone ester KE4 or the Kinetic Pro. And the reason and Kinetic Pro, not Kinetic, the reason I only use those two, when we think about how those ketones are going to be metabolized, are the delta beta hydroxybutyrate is bioidentically to our own ketones. So that's a great thing. But if we dump a bunch of them in the system, that can be added stress on the liver. It can actually have a central nervous system depressing effect. And we're going to get kind of this drop off in energy. When it's paired with the 1,3-butane diol that has to be converted into the beta hydroxybutyrate, now all of a sudden we've got a sustained stream of ketones. But more importantly than that, the reason ketones are so amazing, one of the many reasons, I could go on for hours about ketones, but the reason they're so amazing is they optimize the NAD plus to NADH ratio. And what that does is that activates that NRF2. And NRF2 is the master switch for our antioxidant system. So we have people talking about doing glutathione or NAC. These are all good things. But to directly turn on that antioxidant system, the most effective antioxidant defense you can have is going to come from optimizing that NAD pH. And that's what happens when you take a ketone ester. So the only piece we have left to put in there is, how do we message that cell to say, hey, you know, we're giving you all the fat you need. You've got energy available. We've got a good transit line. Everything you need's in place. Like, now we want the, we'll call it the mitochondrial whisperer, which is going to be that PPAR signaling. And for that,
I like that.
I really like telomesartan. Telomesartan crosses the blood-brain barrier. So if you have anybody that's ApoE4, it's one of the few things that can prevent cognitive decline. But it's a mild PPAR signaling agent that's going to increase fat loss, also decrease blood pressure. So, because there's usually polypharmacy involved if we're talking about people that are using SLU and BAM, now you've done something to protect their blood pressure and kidneys. You've increased the signaling to the mitochondria to use fat, and you've supported the process from start to finish. So I think now, you know, we're on the way to having a protocol that's going to be safe and effective. The last things I'm going to add in, because we talked about structure and membrane potential. When we think about the different complexes, and there are a lot of people that take methylene blue because of its ability to bypass the first couple complexes and donate the energy. A lot of reasons why you don't want to do that, but it is a good thing. I mean, there are some situations, and they're all disease state, where that's going to be beneficial. However, something that can bypass complex 1 and make you more efficient at being able to kind of get that electron transport chain humming is edebenone. It's more bioavailable form of CoQ10. So we can put that in there. We want to have that PQQ. I do urolithin A every day. In fact, and full disclosure, this is my company, so I'm going to shamelessly pimp my product. The SLU-PP-332 we have was redesigned to include urolithin A because it's a mitophagy agent as well as a mitochondrial antioxidant. So you have something that is going to give an extra layer of protection against cleaning up all the mitochondrial garbage, so to speak. And then in terms of something that's going to reduce that oxidative stress and support circadian rhythm, this is where I implement strategic protocols using melatonin, one of the best antioxidants for your mitochondria that we have, and we produce it naturally. And depending on the time of the year and the context, I have different protocols I use. But that's kind of the my big thing about the thought process behind how I'm using SLU and BAM, why I don't do them at the same time, and the structure that's there to support that process from beginning to end.
No, I love that, Anthony. And that whole protocol that you just laid out is phenomenal. And that's something I would definitely love to try myself. Before we toss it back to Alex to respond to the potential negatives of the SLU and BAM together, I do want to make something a little bit more clear. Let's simplify it for the listening and our viewing audience, depending what platform they're actually watching this or listening to it on. When you're talking about the potential overload on the mitochondria from utilizing these two things and the subsequent reactive oxygen species, are we worried? You mentioned, just bad things happening or things fusing together that we don't want to, et cetera, et cetera. Let's quick answer, super simplified for the common person watching with a small grasp on science. Are we talking about just a ton of oxidative stress and feeling like crap, or are we talking like cancer?
Really specifically, the bad things I'm talking about, oxidative stress. To say it's going to cause cancer, that's kind of a leap. Not to say that it wouldn't contribute to it, because cancer is basically a breakdown in cell metabolism. And when you throw redox off, that's 100% what leads to cancer.
But we're not saying that you're going to take a dose and then you have a tumor on day 4.
No, what's going to happen is the stoichiometry is going to change. So you're going to start to fuse together giant complexes of broken mitochondria. And when you do that, you're going to lose metabolic flexibility. So it's a breakdown in cellular metabolism. And that's going to affect ATP production, which is going to affect everything from your immune system to neuronal function. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to happen over time. So I've had about 15 people reach out to me that were taking them at the same time. And the things that we saw were, first thing they noticed was cognitive decline. And when I say that specifically, I mean brain fog. Things that were easy for them to do all of a sudden are a challenge. And then reduced energy, which it's hard to blame the compound specifically. But if you're on a diet, you're taking these, you're making your cell less efficient at producing energy. You're going to be tired. And then in terms of like some lab stuff, we would see things like that we'd expect to be going down. So like H1C start to actually go up, and we'd see things like that 8-OHDG start to indicate more oxidative stress. So, I guess simple answer for people that not strong science background, if you're taking these things after a couple weeks, you're probably going to have some brain fog. After a couple more weeks, maybe even sooner, there's going to be some unexplained fatigue, even when you're eating right and you've dialed back your training volume. So brain fog and fatigue are going to be the two biggest things you're going to notice. And ironically, those are things that should be improving with use of things for mitochondria. And if I could just touch on one more point real quick, with regards to the SLU, really cool kind of side note, and Alex brought it up with the benefit for the eyes. And it's the same reason that red light works for the eyes, that you don't have to do it site specific, luckily. Anything that's going to improve mitochondrial function, and that's why SS31 is approved for macular degeneration, is going to improve how your eyes work.
I tried SS31 eye drops the other day, and it makes you feel like you're an elf, like from Lord of the Rings. You get elf vision in like 5 or 10 minutes. It burns, but man, SS31 eye drops with BPC and TB, you feel like you're seeing into the future. It's super cool.
I love Alex has been kind of in the background for like the last couple of years, just formulating all this crazy vision stuff. Because it always kind of, I made a thing to see in the dark. Oh, I did this. Like, meanwhile, Alex is back here trying to cure blindness and give us all supervision and not talking about it that much. But to segue back, I just wanted to touch on that. And thank you for clarifying, Anthony, because there's some people on social media and whatnot that I think are most likely hearing the points that guys like you are making, and they're parroting them without understanding them and then driving their content through fear mongering, because what we're looking at is the combination of the two chronically for a long time, beating up on your system and then kind of having a reverse effect of what we want. I now understand it more as it's probably something more like, in your opinion, it can build up to something like training really hard every single day and never taking a rest and overtaxing the system, and that can obviously lead to damage. Whereas there's some people that are trying to make it akin to doing the Stan Marsh from South Park and putting your balls in the microwave every day, and it's going to all of a sudden do something terrible within a couple of weeks. So it's good to have that differentiation. So we're not saying that combining these two, you're going to die. It's saying that it's combining these two potentially chronically can lead to backtracking from the results that you want to get. So Alex, with that understanding and with everything that Anthony just said, how would you make a rebuttal to that in favor of the two? Or potentially, how would you suggest to run the two in such a way that you can mitigate the damage that Anthony is worried about?
Just trying to get a little bit of cancer, Stan.
Just a little bit of cancer.
I love that episode. That's like one of the few episodes of South Park I've seen. So obviously, 1,000% respectful. Absolutely love you, Anthony. If we look in, Drew, if you want to take the screenshots, I can send them over of the case studies I posted on my member site for SLU, BAM, and the combination. I've used the combination to help reverse, I forget how many, a couple dozen cancer patients. I've used it to improve HbA1cs, pull down HSCRPs from 10s to 0.6s. Like across the board, I've seen it be used as a health-based agent. So I think maybe the discrepancy here, at least that I might be hearing, and Anthony, correct me if I'm wrong, is I see it more as a dosage problem. Because if you take too much, you get the spin-off of oxidation, and that's what causes all these negative side effects from an oxidative standpoint. But if you're just looking at it from a baseline, like any combination of these products will cause the same issue, I don't see how that can happen, because that's kind of based on biology, right? Like talking about bleeding energy and taking energy in, that sounds like intra-workout nutrition and training, right? You look at the mitochondria from multiple different aspects, but it's the management of subatomic particles. On top of that too, at least again, this is where it's tough with the research out there. We don't have the research on the combination, right? We really don't. But if we look at what's done in cell cultures and what the research we do available to us, that's in those specific studies. That's not someone who's taking HRT, which bridges the proton gradient gap. That's not someone who's tracking their nutrition or having good sleep or taking PQQ, vitamin C, glutathione, vitamin C, exogenous ketones. You're doing all of these things in the right environment. So I do agree, if you're kind of like, if you're more energetically sick, obese, like the sicker you are, the worse the combination is, because you have to have the underlying architecture built up. But I think we're saying the same thing maybe, but I think it's more of a matter of dosage that's the problem. Because anytime someone has a poor response, we pull it out, because there's always going to be non-responders. But I see the vast majority of it just being a dosing problem. So instead of going crazy like some people do, 500 milligrams of BAM and a full milligram of SLU, start low at the 100 micrograms and 50 milligrams, or even half of that. Is that what you're saying is a dosage problem, or you're saying no matter what, they're always going to cause problems?
So 100% agree on dose. Respectfully, I don't think there's any situation where I'd take them together. The reason is, to your point, there are no human studies looking at both of them together. So all we can really go by is pathway and mechanism. And when we look specifically at those things, you're never going to go wrong. And what's amazing is you can look at people with genetic issues. And when you have a genetic issue and it expresses, what you have to look at is not what's a genetic issue, what's expressing, how do I shut off this gene? What you want to look at, it's like, well, I'll go back and give the analogy in a minute. It's like you've got this block in the pathway and there's other ways to get there. So how do you get there? So it's just like if you got a trip coming up to California, I live in Ohio, and I can get there all sorts of different ways. And let's say the main road, there's not a main road, but the main road's closed. So what's the most efficient way I can get there? Where do I need to turn to get there so that I'm still getting to California? And the reason I use that analogy and the reason that all of our decisions should hinge on pathway and mechanism, in my opinion, is because those have been established. We know they're right. When people look at the research, when a study's eventually set up, this is what they're going to go by. So if we follow pathway and mechanism, there's no situation I'm aware of where it makes sense to use them together. And the last point that I'd make too is when we're looking at positive outcomes for people that might have done them both together, we can't really say that that's why that outcome happened. There's polypharmacy involved. And
you
these
can't
aren't
say that,
controlled
though.
Studies.
You can't say that, though, because everyone's taking everything, right?
Well, yeah, but if there's polypharmacy involved, I guess my point is that to say that, oh, because they added this in, I reversed cancer, it could have been any one of those other things. I think the most important things to look at, in my opinion, and again, I have a tremendous amount of respect for you. Absolutely love you.
Oh, yeah,
You did
all
brilliant
positive, all
work.
positive. I'm just getting excited.
But I think that we need to think about the redox state of somebody, and there's no way to measure that. That it's something that's in a constant state of flux. So there's not a reliable test like you can pee in the morning and see what your redox potential is. And we have to follow the pathway and mechanism. So without knowing the redox state, and I'll use myself for an example, real story here. I don't know if you guys know, end of May, I landed myself in the ICU for 5 days, and I'm a pretty healthy guy. And what happened was I had got a virus, started feeling kind of dizzy, and being the dumbass I am, went ahead and pushed through a workout on Monday because it was the only day fiance and I could work out together. And I had been doing a bunch of stuff, to support my mitochondria, just optimize. And that's actually where I learned about the importance of structure. I hadn't been addressing the structure and the substrates. So I've been doing all this stuff. And fast forward to Wednesday, I'm walking Jeter at favorite spot to walk him. All of a sudden, I could not take air in. I completely dropped. The paramedics came, picked me up, intubated me over to ICU. And the reason I share this is because 5 days later, when I got out, I lost 31 pounds. Nobody had an answer. So I went back through all my labs, looked at everything, and I was able to figure out essentially what happened is it was an energy crisis that mitochondria couldn't keep up with the demands. And the beauty of this is, one, I made it through so I can share this information with other people and help people prevent this happening, because it didn't happen overnight, but it seemed like it happened overnight. Because leading up to that, I was 200 pounds, 9% body fat, brain was razor sharp. And then boom, that happened. And that's what we don't think about, that these, so to get back to the question, is somebody going to die if they take this? Without knowing the redox state, I'm not saying they're going to die, and I'm not trying to fearmonger, but I want to stress the importance of something like a viral insult plus a hard workout could be that tipping point for them, just like it was for me. And so I guess kind of big picture, bringing everything back home, the things that I would ask yourself if you're thinking about using these compounds, first and foremost, start with the basics. Get your sunlight, get your lifestyle right, make sure you're hydrating, make sure you got your lipids. You got to be hydrated so the cell is polarized so these things can work. You have to have your lipids for your cell membranes, mitochondrial structure. And then the biggest stress you can add in is training. So optimize your training. Once you get those things dialed in, then we can have the conversation about what compounds can we add in. And when we add those compounds in, it's going to make a lot more sense. And in terms of, then should I take SLU by itself, BAM by itself, or should I do the combo? What I would ask you is, are you going to see improvements that you wouldn't see doing them separate if you take them together? And I have never seen, in my experience, that be the case. And I don't have the amount of data that Alex has, the only data I have to go off of is the people who reached out to me that were having side effects. So with that being said, people who have taken SLU by itself, people who have taken BAM by itself, I've got, and they're not official studies. This is just my observation of clients I work with and specific metrics based on that. I've got sufficient data to say that both of these can improve lab markers like decrease fatty liver, improve insulin sensitivity, all this stuff. But that's doing them separately. So I guess we don't really have an answer. There's never been a study where they compared both of them and then they measure things like oxidative stress. And I think even if we could fund a study like this and get it, again, without knowing the redox state, it's, should they even be taking it in the first time?
I love you brought about knowing the mechanism of action, because that's how you base everything, right? And I see SLU and BAM together as being a match made in heaven because of their mechanisms. You have one that bleeds electrons and protons, and you have one that repairs the mitochondria so you get less bleeding. So the only
Which one repairs the mitochondria?
SLU-PP-332.
How?
PGC1 alpha driving AMPK, driving up SIRT1, all driving up mitochondrial memory potential.
PGC1 alpha will create biogenesis, but how does that repair the structure?
The AMPK driver in SIRT1 drives the mitochondria on the inner and outer membrane integrity. So I
thought it worked on SIRT2 and the AMPK. How's that work on the outer membrane?
So if you look at AMPK, PGC1 alpha, protein kinase C, and then phospholinositol 3 kinase, which you usually look with like growth hormones and insulins, those will all improve mitochondrial memory potential. And those will all improve the inner and outer membrane integrity themselves. Does that make sense?
I understand the potential, and I'm sorry, I'm slow.
You're good.
But how's that actually improving the structure? The potential, it's kind of like, if you've got a car that can go 200 miles an hour, but the frame of it's just, taped together.
Okay. So that's the gap then. So mitochondrial membrane potential essentially is how hard you're driving the mitochondria, which again, overdriving hyperpolarization will then cause essentially the machine to fall apart. So if we use your analogy, you are, what'd you say in the beginning? The pool, it was leaking, or not the pool, the
hot tub or cold plunge is leaking.
Yeah, there we go.
You're putting water in it at the same time.
Exactly. So as the water is leaking, the SLU is coming and fixing that gap, but you're still leaking water, being ATP, being protons, and essentially driving beta oxidation and fat loss. So you have the SLU driving repair, and then the BAM15 base causing the wasting. And the only problem comes in if you take too much, because then that does cause exactly what you're saying. Overspinning, too far hyperpolarization, and you got too many holes to plug. You can't fix it.
I guess what I'm saying is we've addressed the membrane potential, but we haven't addressed, when we talk about repairing the structure, if the raw materials aren't there to repair the structure, it can't happen. And because of the difference in pharmacokinetics with both of these, the rate of absorption and the half-life, there's no way that those match up, that they can be repairing at the rate that they need to, and at the same time burning off the energy.
Yeah, exactly. So because we're looking at non-genomic and genomic factors of pharmacokinetics and dynamics, we're not looking at half-lives, because half-lives don't matter. You could take one dose of BAM today.
I'm sorry. Could you explain that? Because my listeners aren't that advanced. Could you in words that they can understand?
All right. I'm getting excited. Chill, Alex. All right. So if we look at pharmacokinetics and dynamics, right? So normally people look at half-lives, and that's kind of it, right? People will say, okay, after a fifth application, it'll peak, plasma concentrations will be hit, you can sustain it. If you add doses above that, it kind of layers on immediately. You don't need another 5 doses, right? So in real pharmacokinetics and dynamics, we're really looking at non-genomic and genomic action, meaning non-genomic, picoseconds of when you take something, injection, pill, things are happening the moment it occurs. And then genomic, mean more at the epigenetic change. So that's the whatever you take now, like one dose of any pharmaceutical compound or peptide will change you epigenetically forever. Might not be that noticeable to you, but it still changed your epigenetics forever. So we're looking more at the non-genomic acute and the genomic chronic changes between taking these two. Because if you look at half-lives...
One more thing, just because I think I've been wrong on the terminology. Epigenetics, from what I understand, is expression of your genes. So that's an immediate thing that happens from stimulus. So when you talk about changing epigenetics forever, Do you mean genetics forever?
Exactly. So epigenetics will alter genetics forever. And you get what? It's like every 10 years, you kind of like recycle and get a whole new set of genetics, if we want to call it that.
Again, and I might be mistaken. I didn't think it was 10 years. I think that, just to give you an example, like when we think about our telomeres, and that protecting the DNA and the transcription. And when we think about things like histone deacetylase, that when, so to back it up a little bit and keep this so that my listeners and I can make it simple. So if we go get an injury and there's going to be a small change made in our genes, and that's going to be the new recipe, and that's going to be written, and that's why we get some of these, one of the reasons we get some of these lingering injuries. And when we think about, I forgot where I was going with this. When we think about,
you're talking about histones, deacetylation, chromatin.
Yeah. Thank you. So when we think about, kind of the rate that DNA can change and transcription and these things, I think it's pretty immediate, because if telomere is shortened and that DNA chain's exposed and the histones aren't wrapped up, and there's damage from like an injury or whatever, that can be transcribed. So that's why something like a ketone ester that decreases histone deacetylase one of the reasons it can reduce inflammation. And that's why when people talk about epitalon and longevity, although that's completely wrong in my opinion, essentially all they're doing is they're protecting the end of the shoelace so that something like a GHKCU can go in and repair that DNA, so that when it's transcribed, now all of a sudden we're writing the right information.
Yeah, no, that's right. We're looking at global genetics being recycled essentially every 10 years. So you essentially have a new genetic body. So every single genetic system in your body, everything written at that cellular level, they're saying the numbers are rough like 8 to 10 years. We have like a new set, but those changes are happening daily, like you said, because you have the chromatin and the histone conversation, right? Well, you can take products to decondense that, to unroll that. You can modulate so many different ways. There's things like sodium valproate and all these cool compounds. Like you talked about the Vilons. I think you said Vilon, right? All these things to alter that.
Where did they come up with 10 years? I guess I'm interested because this is new to me. I've not heard of that before.
I'll have to find the research for you. They were tracking data over, I think it's been 20 or 30 years. And they say roughly it's every 8 or 10 years. You have they said like a new body, which again, I don't really buy, but they're talking about the global changes that occur.
There's some sort of reset. Yeah, there's something I'm familiar with it. Now, granted, I'm the smallest piece of the pie here in terms of the three of us researching into this, but there is some sort of reset period that I did read about at some point.
My understanding is like when, and this might be what you're referring to, so I apologize if it's redundant, but I know at the Buck Institute, they're looking at this immune clock. And I think that that is maybe when we're talking about, kind of a 10-year thing, that might be along the lines of what you're talking about. But the actual like DNA and everything, my understanding is that can be changed almost daily. In fact, like microbiome, short side note, they did a cool study where with brainwaves, they reprogrammed microbiome in hours for what we usually thought took 6 months.
There's so many different ways to like make these acute and chronic changes.
Yeah.
It's incredible. To reel it back a little bit, because we could literally keep going down this rabbit hole forever.
I apologize.
Don't apologize, because literally I'm sure there's a couple thousand people just taking notes right now, and trust me, I'm one of them. I'm sure people see me trying to jot stuff down as we're going. But just to kind of reel it back and then close out with a little bit of information that can give some people some more potential actionables. And then we'll have to do a further deep dive at another point in time, because I have a pretty good feeling this podcast is going to perform pretty well. So before we close it out for the day, I'm going to pose a quick question to both of you guys, and I'll let you both make some final points as well too, because we don't really have a hard stop time. I just don't want to take your entire morning.
Sure.
But let's think about like a quick, 2 to 3 minute protocol to go over. And what I would like to present is, Anthony, if I came to you And I said, here are my settings. I'm a fairly optimized human being, 9-10% body fat, like everything, health markers are great. And I just want, 40 years old. I want to be cognitively sharp, but I want to be shredded, but I want to improve everything. Alex's term, do it all, have it all. But here's my thing. I bought these 4 bottles of MetaShred, and I'm motherfucking using BAM and SLU together. How would you build a protocol for that based on frequency, dose, other things to take to mitigate damage and whatnot? And then afterwards, Alex, I'm going to come back to you. Same situation, different guy.
I love this question.
I refuse to take
Good
these
job.
together.
Yeah.
So, Anthony, don't make me waste my MetaShred money. How am I utilizing this to the best of my ability? This is a true question, too. I have 4 bottles.
I would take 1 capsule a month, and I would increase your use of either Kinetic Pro or KE4. That's the simplest answer. It's a great question, but honestly, I can't.
So let's pose it like this. So that way, because I don't want to put you in a position to speak on something that you're actually opposed to. But let's say I am taking it, and let's say I'm taking it, 4 days a week on my biggest output days of the week, just massive cardio days and whatnot. I'm in a slight deficit or whatnot. What should I be paying attention to as far as what to supplement with on the days I'm taking it and on the days I'm not taking it, in terms of either utilizing fuel and substrate, giving myself the tools to actually build the cell? What other things should I incorporate to mitigate the damage that you would be fearful of and to get the best out of the situation?
By default, it's going to be the Kinetic Pro. Reason that's so important, or KE4, either of those combo esters. Reason that's so important is you're going to activate NRF2, so that's your antioxidant system. And when we look at what happened to me, that essentially my pulse oximeter read normal. That's missignaling to the chemoreceptors. So because you can create ATP right away with ketones, that's going to kind of rescue you in worst case scenario. I think I would absolutely take urolithin A every day, alpha linoleic acid. I like the Body Balance or Body Bio Balance Oil, 2 capsules twice a day. Plasmalogens, 2 neuro in the morning, 2 glia at night. Phosphatidylcholine complex by Body Bio, 2 of those twice a day. Fatty 15. These are all things that are going to support the membrane. Hydration, neutral osmolytes. I could give you a whole rundown on that, but for simplicity's sake, I would just tell people New BioAge has a great product. It's called iCell Water. And that when you have those neutral osmolytes, it's going to create cell volume. When you have cell volume, that polarizes a cell. So you're creating an environment where signaling is going to be optimal. Making sure you're using melatonin in the evening. Dose is going to depend on a lot of factors, so I don't want to really talk dose. Going to depend on time of year. And even supplementing with Pinealon to support the function of that brains. Obviously, I need some ketones to support the pineal gland. Yeah, gosh. I think as a starting point, of course, PQQ, that's going to be pretty good. Now, the other things I talked about earlier too, if we're all out protocol, telmisartan, injectable carnitine, the 5-amino-1-MQ. And I think at least you've optimized the environment. You've created a situation where if you're going to use these together, it's going to be as safe as possible. And you really kind of covered all your bases in terms of structure, function, et cetera. I'd really encourage you, go get your labs run. Vibrant Labs has an oxidative stress test that's really good. There's a new, I actually just sent mine in. I'm waiting to get the results back, mito.me. And you can look at mitochondrial genetics, all that stuff. There's a couple tests out there. The problem is it seems like the other ones that are out there, I know some doctors that have tested them and they're inconsistent with the results. So, but if you kind of know what you got to work with for your mitochondria, then you can do a CoQ10 test so you can have some idea of where you're at with membrane potential, like what the stuff Alex was talking about. And you're doing things that support that process from beginning to end. And most importantly, structurally, I think that you're covering as many bases as you can. Obviously, this still goes against my recommendation, but I do understand there are people that bought the product and are going to use it regardless what I say. So I think this is the way that you create as safe an environment as possible.
Awesome. And Anthony, thank you so much for playing ball with that question. I realize that that's kind of akin to walking up to the Pope and being like, if you're going to worship Satan, how would you do it? Like, it can be a little polarizing, but thank you so much for that, because I think that's a phenomenal answer. Now, Alex, I know this is probably going to be an easier answer for you because I'm sure you've also utilized them separately. But what's your best protocol for separating the two? Like, how would you run them like concurrently? And let's say I wanted to use them both within the same week, if possible. How could I do that?
Yeah, so protocol, Anthony, I don't remember if we did this when we worked together. I believe we did. We did rest days of BAM, training days of SLU. And so you can have
I think
the beta.
when we were working together, we actually decided to take them together. And I remember when we were talking about the products, we thought it would be a good idea. And it wasn't until when I went to the mitochondrial mastermind that I actually realized like I was completely wrong.
But that was after you made a lot of progress. Just saying, just putting that out there. I'm just busting your balls, Anthony.
All right, so Alex, the protocol.
Sorry. So we could do rest days of BAM15, training days of SLU. So we have the driver on mitochondria essentially on training days, kind of the driver on more beta oxidative factors on those rest days, assuming this is someone who might get that over effect of BAM, and they might kind of have that temporary downregulation in energy. So if we're trying to then drive, think about it like rest days beta oxidatively. And it's not like you're turning that switch on and off. Everything's happening every single time. We could bias more fat loss on those rest days, bias more anabolism on those training days. Then we could pair something like the exogenous ketones with the BAM15 on the rest days. We could have probably something like some kind of a thyrogen. Thyroid supports micronutrient efficiency. It's kind of up to par. A little bit of carnitine to then flux energy molecules. And since we already have some calcium influx coming from the BAM in the brain, we can add in J147 to potentiate the hypertrophy of the brain. So a little bit of fat loss, a little bit of neurology on those rest days. Then on the training days, you have your SLU. Maybe this is the day where you could bring in, or if you, depending on the person, if you have exogenous growth hormone peptides, you could rotate them. So maybe on the fat loss days, you do more like a peptide. And maybe on more of the anabolism training-based days with the SLU, you go something with exogenous growth hormone. So you could play with things and tweak them in that way. Depending on what else is in rotation, you could then layer in other compounds on those anabolic-based days. Could be maybe that's the day you do a higher dose of berberine or metformin or exogenous insulin, depending where you are at on the athletic longevity biohacking spectrum, because there's so many differences there. And then, you could layer in a bunch of stuff there, some hyaluronic acid, localized injections to pull in stem cell migration to grow that specific area. So if you have a leg that you're trying to grow your quads, you can also bring that in kind of in a post-workout, highly myotraumatic scenario. Bunch of different things. Could be an IGF DES kind of 90 minutes post-workout after you get first pass through liver of your exogenous growth hormone, assuming you set it up with a training, post-workout, exogenous growth hormone, and then 69 minutes later, first pass, hit a local application of DES to the area. You'll go with myocyte maturation proliferation. I'd probably stop there because I can keep adding stuff, but that'd be a cool little scenario that I've used in the past pretty well.
No, that's a great scenario. That's a great protocol. And I love, and again, I'm beating a dead horse. I love every time I get to kind of step up my own knowledge base on how different things work. And that's what I try to press to the audience so much, is because when you realize how these things work, you realize how you can utilize them, and we can get further and further away from, when we all broke into this, everything was saturation dose. Build this up, you get to do these couple compounds, you run them until they're at peak saturation, you run it for 12 weeks. there's your phase. It's either fat loss or it's muscle gain or it's this or it's that. And the more that we learn and the more that technology evolves, the more that we learn how to utilize these things, we can have different days based on different performance goals, different cognitive goals. And it might take a little bit longer to get bigger or to get leaner if we're trying to do everything all at once, but we can kind of get the best of every single world, or we can lean towards one, leverage one over the other. And it's just continuous education, and the pursuit of knowledge is going to give us the tools to continue to do this as the technology advances, especially now that we have all this information like this podcast up there.
Yeah, I just want to say really quickly too, before, like when we were planning to record this podcast, one of the things that it was echoed by all three of us, was we wanted a conversation that me and Anthony had different lenses and viewpoints on, but we're respectful. We understand, like, to me, this is what this new generation of longevity, biohackers, like whatever we want to call ourselves, like, I want this to be the template for the future debates, conversations, because me and Anthony are going to be friends. Like, we're always going to be friends and brothers. We can have different lenses, different ways to apply things, have completely different results in every person we work with. And yet that doesn't matter. It's all about what applies for you. So to everyone out there who watch this, whatever you think sounds better, if you agree more with Anthony, if you agree more with me, try that one, and then try the opposite. Try and keep everything the same. Do 1 month of one month of the other, 1 month of both. See how you respond and make your own informed decision. I think that's the best way, because everyone responds differently. But I like this whole template of future debates, conversations, whatever we're going to call them. I really do. It's cool.
1,000% agreed. And I'll tell everybody watching this also, it doesn't matter which one of these guys that you side with, no matter who you listen to, you're going to spend a bunch of money, because every time I talk to one of you guys, I go out and I spend like a mortgage payment on new stuff to try, which I'm not complaining. I'm just saying there's no cheaper option between the two of you.
Yeah.
So before we close out, so I know we've all got a ton of really cool stuff going on. Anthony, what are you working on right now? What's your current just place of research? Anything coming out from you in the future? I know you've got your supplement company. Like, what's going on with you?
Yeah, so I just want to echo what Alex said. I mean, amazing conversation today. Absolutely love both you guys. And it is so cool to be able to have different opinions, hear things, learn things, and have an open, respectful forum. With regards to what I'm working on, got my company, alchemiclabs.com. We just launched that SLU, urolithin A combination. We have a BAM15 product, and we've got 4 new products that are going to be coming out that are nutrition supplements. What
are they? What's in them?
I don't want to say too much about them, but we've got a sweetener for coffee that drives AMPK. We've got mitochondrial structural kind of one stop, and your mitochondria has got everything it needs for that solid foundation, so these compounds can even perform. We've got a hydration product coming out where when we think about the optimal osmolality for a solution, nailed it on the head, and a sleep formula. And these are all things I'm super excited about. There's some new compounds I've been researching, so we'll kind of see where that goes. In terms of other stuff, still doing a lot of consultations, trying to balance that with enjoying time with Julie and Jeter and Hannah, our adopted cat, my bulldog and gorgeous fiance, batted way above my average, and doing a lot of stuff with the SSRP. It's just such a fantastic place to learn at. Eternally grateful to Dr. Seeds and the whole organization. Just to give you guys an idea of how amazing of a person he is. When I was in ICU and he found out he was on the next plane over, actually came to see me in the hospital and has supported me the whole way back, kind of, what happened, what do we do? And just incredible, speaks volumes for, this is more than just they take your money and give you a certificate. This is a family. This is people that really care. And I'll be in the near future, I don't want to say any date because I am technologically retarded, in the process of putting together my own podcast that is going to merge cellular medicine and strength training. And each month, simple format, week 1, introduce a topic, break it down so everybody's on the same page. Week 2 and 3, I'm going to have guests, and week 4 will be dedicated to question answer. each year it's going to be like you graduated a year of college. And by the time we get to 10 years, I'm going to be a lot smarter. And anybody that's along for the journey will be even smarter than me and have an opportunity to learn from each other.
Awesome. Anthony, that's amazing. I'm so happy to hear all that. I'll just forward you my credit card number so you can just take my money and send me the supplements as they come out. It'll be easier for everybody. Alex, I know you've got a lot of cool stuff going on, and you've got your school group. I definitely want you to touch on that a little bit because I'm a member, and it is worth every single penny. So what do you have going on?
The school group's fun. That whole members forum where I can talk about things I can't really talk about publicly anymore if I have certain contracts or NDAs, like that's been cool. I can kind of have a lot of more free reign. So I've been really liking that. We had the one Q&A, going to be having another one coming up soon. So I've really enjoyed doing that. In the background, about to sign contracts with an NFL team and an NHL team. So I'll take up the majority of my travel time. And then the two, since we're talking about the mitochondria stuff, right? There's one group in the mitochondrial transplantation world, and then one group on the exogenous mitochondria. So we were talking about that because I sent you guys the audio message the other day. I was super amped up. Actually testing again with more JC1 dyes, millivoltage changes, and seeing what we can do to exogenous mitochondria, which is interesting because in the manufacturing side of things, so transplantation seems easier and more imminent, like, probably like 6 months, 8 months, and people have this in like your normal clinic. Whereas the exogenous mitochondria to me seems like we're kind of far off, at least from what I'm understanding, because we're able to put this into a medium culture. We can put different growth factors, hopefully some clothos, some things like that into that culture. We can get these mitochondria to spin, 70 to 100 times faster and more efficiently than normal mitochondria. So that means 70 to 100% more ATP production. Problem with that is that's not always a good thing because it goes back to what we said, the hyperpolarization, too much spin-off ROS. So it's kind of how much do we want to engineer these mitochondria above their baseline? Because the baseline is going to change from person to person. So I think that's actually pretty far away. I mean, the research they're doing is super interesting. I'm trying to get them to go through a whole process of treating cell cultures of mitochondria and seeing what a vitamin C dose at X dose would do. Same thing with glutathione, with SLU, with SS31, and see the millivoltage change. So then roughly everyone can say, hey, if you're taking this, it's roughly going to do this. So maybe you can only add 2 or 3 things and you kind of add up the numbers. So it's like an easy chart for people to follow. Won't be 100%, accurate, but it'll at least give you some guidelines to follow. But I think other than that, like those are the kind of big things, the big research group in the mitochondria world. Oh, I do have the potential to, I would like to say train, but I don't think I could say that, to consulting with a really big oncology group in the US, like one of the bigger ones out there. I finally surpassed the acceptable amount of cancer reversals or whatever to where you get noticed in a good light. And just so everyone knows, it's not going against chemotherapy or radiation. It's talking with your oncologist and having layered in therapies to potentiate them. So you only need 3 sessions versus 20 sessions because I don't want to get killed. I don't want to go down to the pharma. And in reality, I mean, you can make these work in conjunction with them. So that's another cool little thing I'm getting into. And then obviously going to be dumping a ton of money into Anthony's products because I'm pumped for those.
So Anthony, don't worry about your mortgage for the next couple of months. Yeah. Now it's got it. You're good. Awesome. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the DDT Method Podcast. This has probably been the most informative episode we've ever released. Even if you're just looking on sheer time alone, because we're coming up on 2 hours of nonstop information. But nonetheless, hour 1 was still probably one of the most informative podcasts in this realm of discussion that you're going to find potentially for a long time, if I can just pat myself on the back for hosting the platform, but not for the knowledge, because that's from these gentlemen here. Guys, it's been an absolute honor and a privilege. I still feel like I have brought in the game genie of obtaining knowledge by just happening to have a podcast that caught on. Thank you so much for your time as always. Love both you guys and continue doing what you're doing because it is nothing but a testament to the people that you are and a benefit to the community. Everybody else, we'll see you guys next week on the DDT Method Podcast.